Montana Territory, September 1883. The wedding dress was still clinging to her legs when she stumbled into the barn, her breath ragged, her cheeks cut by wind and tears. Victoria Calder did not stop to think. Her boots sank into hay and she dropped to her knees behind a stack of feed sacks, clutching the skirts of her torn white gown with shaking hands. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. Rain began to fall, soaking the tracks she had left behind in the dirt. Maybe God had offered her a mercy, washing away the proof that she had run. The barn smelled of horses, leather, and something warm, alive. She pressed her back against the wooden wall, trying to calm her breathing. Then footsteps. Heavy, sure. A man's boots on the planks. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth. The stall door creaked. A lantern swung up. "Who's there?" She froze. The light fell on her like judgment, catching the white of her dress and the mud on her hem. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair that curled near his collar and a face that looked like it had seen too many winters. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, and he had a rope slung over one shoulder. His eyes narrowed, but not in anger. He looked at her like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Ma'am," he said low. "You all right?" Victoria stood slowly, legs trembling. I did not know where else to go." He set the lantern on the stall rail. "You are shivering. I am not here to steal." "I swear it." She straightened despite the cold. "I just needed to get out of the storm." He nodded once. "You picked the right place for that." She blinked at him. "My name is Reuben Keller," he said, stepping back to give her space. "This is my land. You can stay the night. Come morning we will talk." Victoria's breath caught. He was not sending her away. "I am Victoria Calder," she whispered. He nodded again, like that made sense to him. "You can use the hayloft. It will be warmer up there." She hesitated. "Thank you." Reuben moved to the ladder, climbed a few rungs, then looked down. "You need help." She shook her head and climbed up after him, skirts dragging. The loft was quiet, dry, and filled with the scent of stored hay. He handed her a folded quilt from a trunk in the corner. "My sister left it behind last year," he said. "She married and moved to Billings." Victoria laid the quilt down. "Thank you." Reuben looked at her for a long moment. "You are not married, are you?" Her breath stilled. "I was supposed to be today." He nodded, not asking more. "Rest." "I will be in the house." She watched him disappear down the ladder, the lantern swinging in his hand. Victoria woke just before sunrise, the barn glowing gold through the slats in the wall. She sat up slowly, sore and stiff but warm under the quilt. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, the lace torn at the sleeves. She lifted a hand to her hair, still pinned in places, and let out a soft breath. She was free. Climbing down the ladder, she stepped out into the crisp morning air. The ranch stretched before her, rolling hills, a few scattered cottonwoods, and the distant blue-gray outline of the mountains. The air smelled clean. Honest, Reuben was by the fence, feeding a chestnut mare. He turned when he heard her. "Morning," he said. Victoria nodded. "Thank you for not turning me out. I have seen folks come through here running from worse." He tossed the horse another flake of hay. "You hungry?" She hesitated, then nodded. Inside the house, the kitchen was plain but warm. A kettle sat on the stove, and the table had been set for two simple tin cups, fresh biscuits wrapped in a cloth and eggs on the skillet. Reuben poured her coffee without a word. They sat across from each other, the quiet stretching between them. "I was supposed to marry a man I did not love," she said finally. Reuben looked at her. "He is older, wealthy. My father owed him. I was the payment." He nodded slowly. "So you ran?" "I waited until the preacher said, 'Who gives this woman?' Then I ran." Reuben's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Good timing." She smiled just a little. The first time in days. That afternoon, she helped him carry water and feed the chickens. Her dress had been replaced with one of his sister's old cotton frocks, faded blue and soft from years of wash. She braided her hair back and worked in silence beside him. At dusk, he brought her to the porch. They sat on the steps, watching the sun bleed out across the sky. "I will not ask you to leave," he said quietly. Victoria turned her head. "Why?" "Because you look like someone who deserves to stay." Her throat tightened. "You do not know me." "I know you are brave." He looked at her. "And I know you showed up in my barn like trouble, but you did not lie, you did not steal, you just needed to breathe." She looked down at her hands. What if he comes looking? I have a rifle and a mind to use it, Reuben said simply. Victoria looked at him then. Really looked. This man had not asked for her. He had not tried to touch her, claim her, or question her past. He had given her warmth, food, and silence when she needed it. And something else. Hope. The next morning she rose before dawn. The barn was still and quiet. She stepped outside, the sky just beginning to glow. The prairie stretched wide and open, the wind brushing her hair as if to whisper, "You are safe now." Reuben was already outside, leading the horses out one by one. He turned when he saw her. "You sleep all right," she nodded. "I did." They stood there a moment, the sun rising behind them, painting the world in gold. "I never had a place that felt like mine," Victoria said softly. Reuben stepped closer. "You do now." Something moved between them, then something certain and quiet. Victoria looked up at him, her voice low. "I think I was meant to find this barn." Reuben reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "And I think I was meant to find you in it." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. She had run from a life that would have buried her. But here, at sunrise, beside a man who had offered her the simple grace of shelter and kindness, she had found something she never expected, a home. Victoria rolled up her sleeves and dunked her hands into the wash basin. The morning sun had dried the earth, and dust clung to her skin like it belonged there. She scrubbed the grit from her fingers, watching the water muddle with dirt. Behind her, the wind tugged at the clothesline, lifting a worn calico dress into a lazy sway. Reuben leaned against the fence post nearby, arms folded. "You take to chores like you were raised on a ranch." "I wasn't," she said, wringing her hands on a cloth, "but I watched the women who did." "Housemaids, mostly," he nodded, saying nothing. A hawk wheeled high above them, its shadow moving across the field in slow circles. "I'd like to earn my keep," she added, glancing at him. "I can mend, cook, keep things clean. I'm not afraid of work." "I never took you for someone who was," he said. She folded the drying cloth and looked toward the hills. "You ever think of leaving, Reuben?" "I tried once," he said. "Went as far as Helena, thought maybe city life would suit me. But I didn't sleep a full night the whole time I was there. Streets never quieted, and I missed the way the wind smells out here." Victoria nodded. "I used to think cities meant opportunity. But the more I saw, the more I felt like I was shrinking." Reuben stepped closer, his boots quiet in the dust. "You don't look small to me," she looked up at him. "You don't know what I've done." "I know you came through something with your spine straight." His voice was low. "That tells me enough." A quiet settled between them, not strained, just full. Later, she stood on a stool in the root cellar, counting the jars of pickled beans and beets. The air was cool and smelled of earth. She heard his footsteps above, slow and steady, followed by the creak of the cellar door. "You all right down here?" he called. "Just making sense of your shelves," she answered, stepping down. "You've got more preserves than a boarding house." He came partway down the steps, ducking his head. "Wasn't sure how long the snow would last year. Overdid it." "Well, if it happens again, we'll be ready," she said, then paused. "If I'm still here, you're welcome to be." She studied his face. "You say that like it's simple." "It is, far as I see it." She rested her hand on a wooden beam. "I'm still figuring out who I am without all the people telling me what I'm supposed to be." "You'll find her," he said. "Just give it time." Victoria felt something shift, then not in the room, but inside her, like a door cracking open. By evening, she had trimmed the lamp wicks, folded the last of the laundry, and brought in the chickens. She found Reuben on the porch, whittling a piece of pine. "Do you always sit here after supper?" she asked, easing down beside him. "Only when I've got something to think on," he said, shaving a curl of wood from the stick. She watched the curl fall to the floorboards. "What are you thinking about?" He looked at her, quiet a moment. "Whether you'll want to stay when the snow comes." She folded her hands in her lap. "I never thought past running. I didn't let myself." "You've got time now," he said, "and a roof." She turned toward the darkening pasture. "I used to dream of a place like this. But I didn't think it could be real, not for me. It's real. And it's yours if you want it," he said, voice steady. She leaned back, watching the last of the daylight bleed out across the land. She didn't speak, not for a long while, but she didn't leave his side either. When the stars came out, she whispered, "I think I do want it." Reuben didn't answer. He just set down his knife, brushed the wood shavings from his lap, and sat with her as the night settled in. The first frost laid a silver hush over the pastures by mid-October. Fence posts wore thin crusts of ice before the sun broke them down. Victoria stepped out of the shed with her fingers red from the cold and a bucket heavy with turnips pulled from the last of the root bed. Reuben was mending a harness near the corral, thick gloves half hiding the scabbing scrape across his knuckles from a colt that had bucked wild the day before. She set the bucket down beside the door. "Anything else need pulling before the ground hardens?" He glanced up. "Just the carrots." "Might be a freeze tonight. I'll see to them before supper." He nodded and wiped his hands on a rag. "You've got a mind for the land." "I'm learning," she said. "Things feel clearer when my hands are busy." He stood, stretching his back with a quiet grunt. "You ever think about what you'd do if you could start from scratch?" She looked down at her boots, one heel caked with dirt. "I used to think about what I'd escape, not what I'd build. What about now? I'd want something ordinary, a stove that works, a porch with a good view." "Peace? You've got a fair piece of that already," she smiled faintly. "Almost all of it." They didn't speak again until the sun dipped low. She worked the carrots from the cold dirt, piling them into a sack, her breath making clouds in the air. When she came inside, the table was already set. A stew simmered on the stove, and Reuben was chopping bread with a steady hand. He didn't look up when she stepped in. "Had a letter come today." Her hands paused as they reached for the stew ladle. "From who?" "Marshall in Miles City. Sent word a fella came through asking about a woman in a wedding dress last month." Her shoulders stiffened. "Did the marshal give him a name?" "No," said the man. "Didn't offer much. Just showed a daguerreotype and asked around." She stirred the stew slowly. "He'll keep looking." Reuben's voice was quiet. "He won't find you here." "I'm not sure that matters," she said. "Some men don't care who they hurt on the way to not finding what they want." He placed the bread on the table, then looked at her. "I won't let anyone touch what's mine to protect." She met his eyes. "You think I'm yours to protect? I think you're someone I'd stand in front of if I had to." She didn't answer, but her hands stopped shaking. The wind picked up after dark. The windows rattled once, then settled. Victoria sat near the fire, sorting through a basket of sewing scraps left behind by Reuben's sister. She lifted a pale green square, soft with age. Her fingers paused. "This looks like it belonged to a child," she said. He looked up from the chair across from her. "It did my niece. She was 5 when they left. She live in Billings now, around there. My sister married a smith, good man. They've got a shop near the rail yard." Victoria folded the cloth gently. "You miss them?" "Sometimes, but the quiet suits me." "I used to think quiet meant loneliness," she said. "Now I think it's just space to breathe." He watched her a moment. "You've changed some since you came." She looked at the fire. "I feel like I've been unwrapped." In the silence that followed, the fire hissed softly. Then Reuben rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark yard. "Snow's coming early this year," he said. "We'll need to bring the tools in from the shed tomorrow." "I'll help." He turned to her, voice low. "You already do." She stood and crossed the room, the hem of her dress brushing the floorboards. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She just set her hand gently on his arm. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "You don't need to know." He didn't move, but he didn't pull away. They stood there, the firelight flickering across the glass, the house holding its hush around them. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow, and inside, something warmer settled into the space between them, something steady, growing, and real. The snow began as a whisper through the air, catching on the corners of the porch roof and settling in thin lace on the windowsills. Victoria drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stepped outside, boots crunching on the hardened ground. The pasture had faded into a wash of white and bone, the fence line nearly swallowed. Reuben stood near the barn, his breath floating in soft clouds, hammering a fresh board into place where the gate had loosened. She crossed to him, silent until he looked up and passed her a box of nails without asking. "I've never seen snow settle so quietly," she said. "It's always the slow storms that last longest." She watched the nail sink beneath the hammer. "How long do they usually stay?" "Sometimes weeks, sometimes through March." Her hand brushed the worn edge of the post. "Then I guess I ought to learn to read the sky." He looked at her, eyes steady. You planning to stay that long? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the next board. I used to be afraid of winter, she said. It meant being trapped in a house with silence I couldn't fill. Reuben held the plank steady while she drove the nail. This house doesn't need filling. She met his gaze, something quiet settling between them again, not new, but surer than before. Later, while she swept the kitchen floor, she found a leather-bound book tucked behind the stove. The spine was cracked and the pages smelled of smoke. She turned it over in her hands and brought it to Reuben, who was oiling the hinges on the cellar door. "This yours?" she asked. He wiped his hands. "Used to be my father's. He wrote down everything he planted, fixed, and butchered. Couldn't read a lick, so he used marks instead." She opened the book to a page filled with small, careful drawings, shapes of tools, the outline of a cow, a moon beside a date. He kept track by moonlight, by feel more than anything. He always said the land talks if you listen close. Victoria traced one of the sketches. "My father never listened to anything that didn't serve him." Reuben didn't speak. She closed the book. "Would you mind if I used a few blank pages?" "I want to start keeping track of what I learn here," he nodded. "I'd like that." The snow thickened through the afternoon. By dusk, the world beyond the windows had softened into a hush of white and shadow. Victoria lit the lamp at the table and set out a tin bowl of dried apples to soak overnight. Reuben came in with a stack of kindling under his arm, brushing snow from his coat. She stirred the fire with the poker. "What was your mother like?" He hung his coat by the door. "Tougher than most men I knew. Once killed a rattler with a hoe and went back to planting beans right after." Victoria smiled, surprised. "Mine never touched soil, claimed it ruined her hands." "Yours ever smile?" "Often, but only when someone important was watching." Reuben sat down, stretching his legs toward the hearth. "You ever miss them?" She sat beside him, tucking her feet beneath her skirt. "Sometimes I miss the idea of them, not the truth." The flames crackled between them, casting their faces in shifting gold. "I've been thinking," he said after a long pause. "Come spring, I'll need help with the lambing." "It's more than I can manage alone." She tilted her head. "Is that an offer? It's a hope." Victoria leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I never expected to feel useful out here." "You're not just useful," he said. "You're steady." She looked over at him, her voice soft. "You make me feel like I'm already part of something." "You are." Their eyes held. Then she stood, quiet and deliberate, and walked to the table. She untied the ribbon from her braid and let her hair fall, fingers working through the strands. Reuben watched her, unmoving. She turned toward him. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me to stay because they wanted me, not because they needed me to serve some purpose." He got to his feet, slow and sure. "I want you to stay because I can't imagine this place without you in it." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I can't offer you more than a fire that stays lit, work that matters, and a man who'll never ask you to be anything you're not," he said. Victoria crossed the space between them. "Then everything I ever ran from brought me to the right place." She touched his face, her hand steady. He kissed her not with hunger, but with the certainty of a man who'd waited long enough to know what mattered. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, and when she leaned into him, it was with the full weight of someone who had found her place, not by seeking it, but by surviving long enough to recognize it when it opened its door. The ground stayed hard through November, each morning rimmed in frost that lingered until midday. Victoria stitched by the window with a piece of wool draped across her lap, her needle pulling in steady rhythm. Outside, a pair of crows picked through the bare garden rows, and inside, the stove hummed low. She glanced at Reuben's coat hung near the door, one sleeve patched with careful stitches she'd made 2 days before. Her eyes lingered on it, then dropped back to her hands. She'd taken to keeping a ledger beside her sewing basket, a habit born from watching Reuben mark his days with quiet diligence. Her entries were simple: wind direction, number of eggs gathered, the last time she heard the coyotes call. A life recorded not because it needed proving, but because it was hers now. Reuben stepped in from the barn, heat rising off his shoulders in the cold air. He unlaced his boots without speaking, then straightened and looked her way. "There's a man in town who trades in lumber," he said. Said he could haul out some good pine before the road closes. For the lean-to, she asked. He nodded. If we're to keep 2 milk cows through winter, we'll need the room. Victoria set the needle aside. You want me to ride in and speak with him? You'd trust him quicker than I would, he said, then added, and he'll listen better to you. She pulled her shawl from the peg. I'll leave after breakfast then. They rode into town together, the mare's hooves muffled by the soft dirt road. Victoria kept her back straight in the saddle, her eyes sharp on the horizon. She had not returned to Miles Creek since the day she fled it, and though she was dressed plainly in a dark wool skirt and a borrowed riding jacket, she felt exposed in a way she had not felt since that morning in the barn. Reuben's presence beside her was a steadying thing. He didn't speak as they passed the old mercantile or the livery, nor when they crossed in front of the church, where the bell tower stood still and silent. She steered her horse toward the lumber yard while he turned toward the blacksmith's to check on a hinge order. She waited near a stack of split logs as the lumberman emerged from the shed, wiping his hands on a rag. You're Keller's woman, he said, not unkindly. I am. Reckon that lean-to's about due for replacement. Snow took half the back wall last year, she nodded. He wrote out what's needed, 4 lengths of beam and enough siding to cover 8 feet. I've got what'll do. Can have it on a cart by tomorrow sunup. I'll pay you in feed sacks and a smoked ham, she said, and I'll throw in 2 jars of plum preserve if you keep your word. The man grinned. Done. As she turned to leave, an older woman stepped from the general store across the road, her eyes narrowing in recognition. Victoria didn't flinch, but she felt her breath catch as the woman crossed to her. Miss Calder, the woman said. Not anymore, Victoria said. And I'd rather not be addressed that way. The woman's gaze flicked to the ring on Victoria's hand. The simple gold band Reuben had slipped on her finger in the quiet of the parlor 2 weeks before. Just the 2 of them and a minister who didn't ask questions. You married the cattleman, the woman said, her voice unreadable. I married a man who treats me with respect, Victoria said. That's all that matters. The woman's expression shifted, not to warmth, but to something resembling understanding. You were right to run. Victoria mounted her horse without another word. By the time they reached the homestead again, the sky had paled to a silver overcast, and the wind carried the promise of deeper snow. Victoria unpacked her satchel and moved to hang the kettle over the fire. Reuben leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You all right? He asked. She nodded. Someone recognized me, but no one asked where I'd gone. He crossed to her and touched her waist, his thumb resting just above her hip. You're not gone. You're here. She turned into him, her forehead resting against his chest. I didn't know I could feel this solid. You've been steady since the day you stepped into my barn, he said. Just took you a while to see it. She closed her eyes, letting herself lean. They spent the evening stringing dried apples onto wire for the cellar. Victoria told him about the lumberman, and Reuben told her about a neighbor losing a lamb to a fox. The talk was simple, the kind of words people spoke when the world was quiet and the worst had passed. By the fire, she pulled the ledger from beneath the chair and dipped the pen in ink. Reuben watched her write. What are you marking today? She said. The part I want to remember. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. Then write this too. We're building something. Together. She didn't look up, but her smile deepened. 3 winters passed. The lean-to stood firm through every storm. The mare bore a filly the second spring, and Victoria named her Clover. Reuben built a porch swing, and she painted it blue. The ledger filled with notes in her careful hand, entries about planting and calving, but also about mornings when they rose early just to watch the sun spill over the ridge. She kept 2 shelves for storing herbs and dried roots, and folks from neighboring homesteads began riding out to ask her advice on poultices and teas. Reuben joked that he'd married a woman with more sense than the whole town put together, and she didn't disagree. They never spoke of the life she left. It didn't belong to them anymore. One evening, as the wind settled into a hush and the lantern burned low, Victoria sat beside Reuben on the porch swing, her palm resting against the soft curve of her belly. You nervous? He asked. A little, she said. But not afraid. The porch creaked gently beneath them. His hand covered hers. "I didn't know I could have this," she said. "You've earned every bit of it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the scent of hay and pine clinging to his shirt. They sat in silence, the kind that held no fear, only fullness. The land stretched wide before them, quiet and sure, and the house stood warm behind them. The barn held the soft breath of animals settling in for the night, and somewhere in the fields, the wind carried the sound of a new season turning. They stayed like that until the stars came out, together. Always.